Now we come to the second half of the first section in the book of Genesis. This is the section of God created as chapters 1 and 2. In the previous video, we covered chapter 1 of this first section, but now we need to come to chapter 2, which is really related to building. The first half was related to life, and you could say the second section, or the second half of this section, is related to building. Okay, this is super significant because the first half is life, but life has a goal, or it has a purpose, which is building. Another way, let me say this as a parenthesis, that you can look at these two halves, is the first half really gives us the purpose. God's purpose is that man would contain him as life, grow in life, eventually express him. Remember that man was created in God's image, given his dominion to represent him in his authority. That was related to God's purpose. He wants man on the earth to express him. Okay, but he needs a way, he needs kind of a procedure in order for doing this. So that's another way to look at these two halves. But in this video, we'll talk about building. So we have life in the first half, and now we're going to get into building. What does building mean? Well, that's really the growth of life is related to building. And the kind of type here is a type of Christ and the church. And we'll see that Adam is a type of Christ, seen in Romans 5:14, and Eve is a type of the church. So this verse in Genesis 1:26, we covered it in the first half, but it's let us, meaning the Trinity here, let us make man in our image. So right away, there's a connection between man and God. Man is in God's image. So in some degree, some capacity, the things that are said about man could also be said about God. And this man is Adam. Okay, well here, it's very striking, this verse in chapter 2, verse 18. It says, "It is not good for man to be alone." So it's very interesting. On day 6, God made man, and after he made man, he said, "This is very good." All the other days of creation, God just said that it was good, but on the 6th day, God, whenever he made man in his image, he said, "This is very good." But in the next chapter, verse 18 of chapter 2, it says, "It is not good." It was good that man was there, but it was not good for man to be alone. And in the same way that man is created in God's image, things that are said about man in many ways can also be said about God. You can say that what was being said here is that it was not good for God to be alone. And that might sound strange to some, so I just want to point out that alone does not equal lonely. Okay, whenever I say that this verse 18 of chapter 2 is not good for man to be alone, could be applied to God and said it's not good for God to be alone, I'm not saying that God was lonely. I am not saying that there was any shortage in God. God is complete. He's all sufficient. But he has a desire. He has a purpose, and the purpose is related to man, meaning the corporate man would express God by containing his life, growing in life to maturity, that he would express God and he would match God. Actually, the very end of the Bible, there is a wedding where the bride of the Lamb has made herself ready. The bride of Christ has made herself ready, and she's made herself ready to such a degree that she matches him. So let's look here in Genesis 2 about related to building and related to what it will take for man, not only Adam, but God, to not be alone. So eventually God made Eve, but let's talk about the type and let's talk about the reality. We can compare two different chapters here in chapter 2 of Genesis and chapter 5 of Ephesians. Okay, so in chapter 2, verse 21, it says that Adam, who is a type of Christ, God made him to go into a deep sleep. And this is the exact same as Christ dying on the cross. The sleep here is a type of Christ's crucifixion. In Ephesians 5, the key words in that verse is that Christ gave himself. He gave himself through his death to produce the church. And so here the type is Adam, deep sleep. The reality is Christ, crucifixion. He gave himself. Okay, so in chapter 2 of verse of Genesis, chapter 2, verse 22, the first part, that's why I put A there. It says that he built the rib into a woman. So Christ, signified by Adam here, was crucified, put into a deep sleep, and then something was taken. Something of Christ, something of Adam. In this case, the picture is the rib was built. There was a building work going on from that rib was built into the woman. And in Ephesians chapter 5 verse 26, he's speaking of the church, and he's saying he's to sanctify her by the washing of the water in the word. That's what's going on in the church age today, is that Christ was crucified. The church now in this age is being built. Something of Christ, something that flowed forth from Christ, produced the church. But the church now, as Eve did, needs to be built. So in Genesis chapter 2, verse 22, the second part, that's why I put B there, was after this woman was built from something that flowed forth from Adam's side, the woman was brought to the man, and Adam said, this is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. And you have to realize that before this woman was built, before Eve was built, all the animals and all the different things of creation was brought before Adam to be presented to him as his counterpart, as something that matched him. But none of those matched him, because none of those things were actually of him. None of those things actually flowed forth from him. But when Eve was built out of the rib, out of something that flowed forth from Adam, God brought the woman to the man, and Adam said he was so happy. This time, finally, this is bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. This is actually something of me that has been built, that it matches me in every possible way. And I tell you, brothers and sisters, it's the same thing with the church. So the church would present the church to himself glorious. After the building work of the church concludes in this age, eventually the church is glorious. And its glorious, glory means God expressed. So the church is the full expression of God in every possible way that it can be. So let's talk about a couple of key points in this section. The built up church is God's ultimate goal. Okay, everything that we talked about in the last video, the growth in life, the maturity of life, expressing God by having his image, representing him as an authority, it's all for the producing of the counterpart of Christ. Just as Eve was the full counterpart of Adam, the church is the full counterpart, the ultimate expression of Christ. Only that which comes out of Christ, meaning Adam's rib and the type here, is the church, which is Eve. Okay, Eve was nothing but the built up rib of Adam. Okay, again, that's just a type that helps us see the reality of the New Testament age, that the church is not a building on the corner. It's not just some activities that people do. Actually, the church is the Christ that has been built into the believers. Okay, believers all over the earth, they believe into the Lord, they receive the Lord Jesus in their spirit as a seed. That part of them is the church. But the church needs to grow. It needs to be built up by the believers' growth in life. And as that Christ that is in those believers grows, the church is built up until eventually Christ could say, this time, at last, this is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. Like in Revelation 19, the bride has made herself ready. Finally, there is my church, matches me in every possible way. I said in Matthew 16, I will build my church. My church has finally been built. Eventually, the church matches me in every possible way. Okay, let's look at a couple of summary points here. So the overview, again, we just covered the first section in the last two videos, God created. But I want to highlight again these three main sections. I'm going to highlight them over and over and over again so we never forget them till the day we die. God created, Satan corrupted, Jehovah called. But let's get into some summary points related to God created. two different halves here, life and building, or you could say God's purpose and his procedure to carry that out. In order for life to be there needs to be requirements or a condition of life, which are the three comings: the Spirit, the Word, and light. And then we need to grow in life from grass to herbs to trees. Again, it's a type, but we need to grow in life eventually. The animal life, fish life, the bird life, the cattle life, the beast life, even the creepy things. There's a progression in life all the way until the human life. But life is growing for a purpose, and the purpose is the building. And you could actually say even the growth in life is the building. So eventually the built up church would be the bride of Christ, would be prepared for him, where Christ could say, this time, finally, my purpose is fulfilled on the earth. I have a corporate man that expresses me in my image, represents me in my authority, and I can say, this time, bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. Okay, Genesis 1 and 2 brings us from the beginning to the end of God's entire purpose. Whoa, I'm excited about getting into the rest of this book.